So, hello students. Today we are going to start with the various vapor cycle as you have seen here on the board. Ki, simple vapor cycle is drawn, and in our syllabus we have to cover some of the vapor cycles like Carnot cycle, Rankine cycle, regenerative reheat cycle, and binary vapor cycle. So these are the four cycles which we have to cover. But before starting with the actual Carnot cycle or Rankine cycle, we have to just understand what is the basic process in the vapor cycles. So as you have seen here, it is a cycle of different machines or devices that are used in the thermal power plant. Okay, so there is boiler. So this B indicates your boiler. This one is the turbine. Why this is the shape of the turbine? From this shape, we have seen that when the steam enters and when it is leaving, so there is a process of expansion in the turbine. Okay, process of expansion of steam is there. So that's why this is the shape drawn for the turbine. And this is the condenser C. This is the condenser, and here is one pipe, or you say coil shaped, like just the arrow is there for the cold water and the leaving is the hot water. Okay, cold water that is taken from some river, and when this cold water comes in contact with the steam inside the condenser shell, its temperature increases, and when it comes out from the condenser shell, so the temperature is high as compared to this temperature. So there is inlet cold water and outlet hot water is there. Okay, and then these are the different arrows, and there is the pump. Okay, that is the feed water pump. The condensate that is taken from the condenser shell is again feed back to the boiler. Okay, so this is the complete cycle that we called as the thermodynamic cycles. Okay, and why these are called as the vapor cycle? Because vapors that is in the form of steam is the main process which is going on in each stage. In the boiler, steam is generated from the water. Okay, in the turbine stage, the steam is expanded, or it is here in the boiler, it is converted into the superheated steam, saturated steam, sometimes dry saturated steam is used. Okay, then that steam is fed to the condenser. Okay, where it condenses, and then through the pump, it is again fed to the boiler. Okay, so in all these stages, a steam is flowing. That's why these type of cycles are called as the vapor cycles. Okay, so this is the vapor cycle. That means a thermodynamic cycle using vapor as working substance. That means the vapors are used here as a working substance. So that's why these are called as a vapor cycle. Okay, and first of all, before starting with the Carnot cycle, we have to just learn the function of each stage. What is the function of boiler? What is the function of turbine? What is the function of pump? That is the feed water pump. I'm just going to write down here. This is the boiler. Here it is turbine. This is condenser. And here it is the feed pump, or you say feed water pump is there. Okay, so starting with the first is the steam boiler. The first process is steam boiler, and as I have written here, you see the numerical numbers 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so these are the different stages that we have to taken while doing the working for this vapor cycle. Okay, now starting with the boiler. So what is a boiler? In the boiler, the fuel is burnt in the presence of air. Okay, so we have already covered some of the boilers like Cochrane boiler, Babcock-Wilcox boiler, locomotive boiler. So what is there in the boiler? A fuel is burnt. That may be a coal. Okay, fuel is burnt in the presence of air, because the burning process takes place only in the presence of air. So the heat in the case of boiler, so the heat energy released due to the combustion of fuel is utilized for the conversion of feed water into the steam. Okay, so what is there in the boiler? The heat energy is released due to the combustion of fuel, and it is utilized here for the conversion of water into the steam. Okay, and that steam from the boiler is then fed to the turbine. So the next is the turbine, steam turbine. Now the steam generated in the boiler is supplied to the steam turbine, where it expands adiabatically up to the condenser pressure. Okay, so in from the boiler, the steam is fed to the turbine through the nozzle system. Okay, and that steam expands in the turbine adiabatically. So what is the adiabatic process? Adiabatic process in which there is no heat loss is there. Okay, no heat loss is there. Actually, we have to deal with some of the terms while studying these vapor cycle, like isothermal process or adiabatic process. Adiabatic is where there is no heat loss within the system and in the environment also. Okay, and what is there in the isothermal system? That is, in the isothermal system, the temperature remain constant. There is no change in the temperature. Okay, so from the boiler to the turbine, when the steam expands in the turbine, it is actually the adiabatic process. That means the heat is not lost here in the turbine stage. Okay, and from the turbine, next stage is the condenser stage. Okay, and in the condenser stage, the exhaust steam from the steam turbine is passed through a heat transfer device called condenser. Okay, the steam from the turbine is passed through the condenser where the heat is released. Okay, and it is actually the heat transfer device. The steam is condensed in the condenser by rejecting heat to the cooling water, and the high temperature of the steam or heat is rejected here in the condenser stage, and that heat is rejected to the cooling water, cold water. Okay, so in the boiler stage, heat is absorbed, whereas in the condenser stage, heat is rejected. Okay, so the condensed steam, and what is the condensed steam that is taken from the condenser shell, that we called the condensate, and that condensate is then again fed to the boiler through the feed pump. So feed pump is used to feed the condensate to the boiler, and this feed pump increases the pressure of the condensate up to the boiler pressure on the expense of work done on the pump. Okay, so what is the function of the pump? One is to feed the condensate back to the boiler, and secondly, it increases the pressure of the condensate up to the boiler pressure. That means the pressure which is required in the boiler. Okay, that pressure is also increased by the feed pump. So this is the complete process or the complete cycle which continues, or we called as the thermodynamic cycle, working in case of the thermal power plants. Okay, now let's start with the Carnot vapor cycle. So our first, actually the diagram remains same. There is very little change in some of the diagrams. And starting with the first vapor cycle now. Now the Carnot vapor cycle. And then in this also the diagram remains same. Here it is the pump, boiler, turbine and condenser. And the first stage is given across the pump, and here let us suppose the at this stage the pressure is PB, and we know that the for the feed pump, it increases the pressure of the steam of the condensate up to the boiler pressure. If here is the pressure PB and then here comes out to be the pressure, let us say P1, its function is to increase the pressure and the work is done in the pump. We call that work done as WP, that is the work done by the pump. And write down here the notations also. WP is the work done by pump. Okay, and next here it is the QI, that is the heat is absorbed in case of the boilers, that is the heat is input. Okay, and here I am using the in the condenser, that is the QR, that is the heat is released in the condenser point. Okay, QI is the heat input, or you say the heat is absorbed in case of the boilers, and similarly QR is the heat released in case of the condensers. Okay, then here comes out to be here is the pressure P1 and the same boiler pressure is created here also. There is again the pressure is P1. Okay, and here is the pressure P1, and when it passes through the turbine stage, we know that the expansion process takes place and within the turbine the pressure reduces. Okay, and that pressure is, let us say, PB, that is the reduced pressure, which is that pressure which is required for the inputting from the feed pump. Okay, the pressure is reduced in case of the turbine stage, and the work done by the turbine is given by WT. WT is the work done by the turbine. Okay, and if there is the shaft that is further connected with the generator, and here it is the work done on the shaft, WS. WS is the work done on the shaft, and write down here WT is the turbine work done, and WS is the shaft work done. Okay, this is the shaft, which is a common shaft between the turbine and the generator. So what is WS? This is actually WT minus WP. Okay, WT is the work done by the turbine, WP is the work done by the pump. So this is the net work done by the shaft, that is WT minus WP. Okay, so this is the complete labeled diagram for the Carnot vapor cycle. Now we have to draw one diagram for the temperature and pressure also. On here it is the temperature T, and this is the type of the curve that is obtained in the vapor cycle. So these are the characteristics obtained for the Carnot cycle working, and this is between the temperature and enthalpy characteristics, where the pressure is also plotted, And see here, these are the different temperatures T1 and T2. T1 is higher temperature and T2 is the lower temperature in the cycle. And here is, these are the pressures. PB is the pressure that is in this stage. Here it is PB. Okay. And here is the P1 and P1. Okay. And as you have seen here that P1 is greater than the PB. Okay. Now these are the different stages: stage 1, stage 2, stage 3 and stage 4. And sometimes apart from this 3 and 4, we have achieved this stage 3 dash and 4 dash also for the different conditions of steam. Okay, and what is this 1, 2, 3, 4? These are also mentioned here in this figure. Okay, here it is 1. This is the stage 2. This is the stage 3 and this is the stage 4. So what is the meaning of 1, 2? 1, 2 stage means that is the process done by the pump. That is, one is on this side of the pump and second is on this side. Then that means in the stage 1, 2, what are the different processes take place? That we have to study accordingly side by side in this figure and in this curve also. Okay, so starting its working process. So what is there in the cycle? Firstly, a Carnot cycle consists of of two isothermal processes, and two adiabatic processes. Okay, that means in the Carnot cycle there are two isothermal cycles are there. Two isothermal cycles means the temperature remain constant in that process. There is no change in the temperature, that is delta T is equal to 0. What is for the isothermal process? For isothermal process means delta T is equal to 0. There is no change in the temperature. Okay, temperature remains constant, as you have seen here that in this process from 2 to 3 the temperature is constant. That is the isothermal process. Okay, and also between 1 to 4 the temperature remain constant at T2. So that is again a isothermal process. Okay, what is there in the adiabatic process? In the adiabatic process there is no loss of heat, no change of heat. Okay, heat, and we denote the heat with Q. Okay, here we have written here that Q, heat input and heat released. Heat is inputting during boiler stage, released during the condenser stage. So for the adiabatic process, heat remains constant. Okay, so this is the basic meaning for the isothermal and the adiabatic process. So in the Carnot cycle, there are two isothermal processes and two adiabatic processes are there. Okay, so let's start with the first stage, that is in the stage 1, 2. So this stage, in the stage 1, 2, that is across the pump. Here it is 1, here it is 2. Yes, in the stage 1, 2, wet vapors at pressure PB. Okay, wet vapors are taken from the condenser, that is in the form of condensate. So wet vapors at pressure PB is taken from the condensers and its pressure is increased to P1. Okay, so see here in the stage 1, 2, the pressure, stage 1 is at pressure PB and the stage 2 is at pressure P1. The pressure increases from PB to P1 by the feed water pump. Okay, and also when this process goes on, the temperature see here, the temperature also increases. Temperature also increases from T2 to T1. Okay. So in this process 1, 2, the wet vapor at pressure PV is compressed in the vapor compressor isentropically, that is the reversible adiabatic process. ठीक है, isentropically up to the boiler pressure P1. So the pressure PV increases to pressure P1. And how the pressure is increased? When the compression process takes place. Okay, the pressure is increases from PV to P1 and by the compression process, and that is called as the isentropic process. Isentropic is actually the reversible adiabatic process. Okay, and during this process, the pressure is increased by the compression process and its temperature also increases. Okay, see here the temperature also increases. And this pressure is increased up to the boiler pressure P1 such that it becomes a saturated liquid. Okay, so in this process 1, 2, wet vapors are converted into the saturated liquid by increasing its pressure. Okay, the work supplied is WP, and what is the work done here at the feed pump stage, that is WP, and the temperature of the steam increases from T2 to T1. So what is the work done here, that is WP in the feed pump stage. Okay, the work supplied is WP and the temperature also increases from T2 to T1. So this is the first stage in this Carnot vapor cycle. So now the next stage, see here, from 2 to 3, that is across the boiler. So what is in the 2, 3? See here also 2, 3. And in the 2, 3, the pressure remains constant now. The pressure across the boiler remains constant. Here the temperature also remains constant. That means it is an isothermal process. The temperature also remains constant here. Yes, in the process 2, 3, in the stage 2, 3, the saturated liquid enters the boiler where the heat Qi is absorbed isothermally at temperature T1 and the steam becomes dry saturated, that is represented by the stage 3. Okay, I am again repeating what is there in the stage 2, 3. The saturated liquid that enters the boiler from here, that enters the boiler, this is a saturated liquid. So here are the wet vapors, here is the saturated liquid that enters the boiler and that is converted into the dry saturated steam. Enters the boiler, is converted into the dry saturated steam by absorbing the heat Qi. Here the heat Qi is absorbed isothermally at temperature T1. Okay, so this is there in the process 2, 3. The heat is absorbed here in the process 1, 2. Work is done by the pump. Okay, in the 2, 3, heat is absorbed by the boiler isothermally at the constant temperature T1. Okay. And steam being in the vapor state, its temperature T1 and the pressure P1 remains constant. So during this stage 2, 3, the temperature remains constant, pressure also remains constant at T1 and P1. And here the process that is going on is isothermal process. Okay. And here the condition of steam is the dry saturated steam. Okay, sometimes what happens, the temperature is further increased up to the level 3 dash, as in some of the cycles there we have to further increase the temperature up to 3 dash and then the cycle goes like this. Okay, but here we have got the condition of this state where the temperature is constant. Okay, now the next stage, that is 3, 4, this stage. 3, 4, that is across the turbine. So across the turbine, again, the work is done by the turbine. Work is done by the turbine, and here again the adiabatic process is there. Okay, and as you have seen here from the 3, 4 stage, the pressure reduces again from P1 to PB, and the temperature also reduces from T1 to T2. Okay, temperature reduces, pressure reduces in the stage 3, 4, and the work is done by the turbine. Adiabatic process take place here. Okay, so in the stage 3, 4, the dry saturated steam at P1. So what is the condition of the steam in this position? That is the dry saturated steam. So this dry saturated steam through the nozzle enters into the turbine and expands there. And when the expansion process takes place in the turbine, the pressure reduces from P1 to PB. Okay, dry saturated steam at P1 enters the steam turbine where it expands isentropically. I'm again repeating isentropically. It is the reversible adiabatic process up to the condenser pressure PB. Okay. So isentropical process takes place and the pressure reduces from P1 to PB, that is at the level of the condenser. Pressure reduces from P1 to PB and produces the work WT, and WT is the work done across the turbine. Okay, the temperature of the steam also drops from T1 to T2. The temperature of the steam also decreases from, see here in this curve, the temperature at 3-4 stage reduces from T1 to T2. Okay, now during the last stage that is across the condenser stage. So condenser, that means 4 and 1. See here also 4, 1. And during this process, the temperature remains constant. Temperature is constant, that means it is an isothermal process. Okay, pressure remains constant, that is at the level of the condenser, that is at PB. There is no change in the pressure. Okay, so and what is here that the wet steam in the condenser stage, the wet steam then enters the condenser where it rejects heat isothermally. So here in this 4-1 process, the heat is rejected. Okay, heat is released. Okay, in the 4-1 process, heat is rejected isothermally at the constant temperature T2. So the wet steam enters the condenser where it rejects the heat QR isothermally at constant pressure. Pressure also remains constant to the cooling water circulated in the condenser. The heat of the wet steam is rejected to this cooling water, and this cold water gains that heat and converted into the hot water, which is again thrown into the river or lake. Okay. The steam then again returns to the original stage 1. Okay. So what is the condition of the steam now? Here it is the wet steam, and this steam, wet steam is wet vapors steam is there, and that wet steam is converted into the wet vapors are converted into the saturated liquid. Here are the wet steam, or you say the wet vapors at this stage 1. There is the saturated liquid at stage 2. At stage 3, there is the dry saturated steam. Okay, and here it is the wet steam again. Okay, so this is the complete the condition of the steam at the different stages 1, 2, 3, and 4. So this is how the cycle repeats itself. Okay, and you have seen there work is done at the turbine, work is there on the pump, heat is absorbed here, heat is released here. Okay. During the stage 2, 3, in this process, This is the isothermal process. Here it is also isothermal process. Okay, here it is the adiabatic process take place. Here it is also adiabatic process take place. Okay, so overall in the Carnot cycle, when we compare this and this, there are two isothermal processes and there are two adiabatic processes take place in the complete Carnot cycle. Okay, thus it completes this thermodynamic cycle which we called as the Carnot vapor cycle. And after that we have to do the Rankine vapor cycle, and this is that Rankine vapor cycle is also the modification of this Carnot vapor cycle. Actually, Carnot vapor cycle is the basic cycle. Okay, that is used for all the rest of the cycles like Rankine cycle or regenerative reheat cycle or binary vapor cycle. So this is the basic cycle to understand, and rest of the cycles are the modifications of this Carnot vapor cycle. Okay, so this is all for today's lecture. Thank you.